The indefinable international organization known as Wikileaks was relatively unknown between its setting up in 2006 and the April 2010 premiere, where it staged the National Press Club in Washington of the Collateral Murder video, a selection of stolen and decrypted gun camera footage that was heavily edited that purportedly shows the unlawful killing of Iraqi civilians and 2 Reuters journalists by the crew of a U.S. Army Apache helicopter. Skillfully edited and promoted and widely accepted by the mainstream media as proof of a U.S. war crime, the video won WikiLeaks fame and praise around the world and made its founder, a 39-year-old Australian named Julian Assange, an international celebrity. That's right, Julian Assange, born actually with the real name of Julian Paul Hawkins, and will be referred to by his birth name, Hawkins, from here on out in this particular video. I saw Hawkins that same month, a week after the release of the video, when he participated in the Oslo Freedom Forum, an annual conference organized by the Human Rights Foundation. At the conference, he quoted Alexander Solzhenitsyn to the effect that one word of truth can outweigh the world, and that one classified video can possibly stop a war, and maybe 50 definitely can, end quote. Hawkins was one of 30-odd speakers, most of whom were dissidents from countries like North Korea, Sudan, Tibet, Iran, Russia, and Venezuela. One of the primary functions of the Oslo Freedom Forum is to give a platform to activists working in countries that do not get enough attention from organizations like Human Rights Watch. It pays particular attention to victims of communism and Islamist extremism. This year it gave a platform to, among others, Mukhtar Mai, the Pakistani woman whose gang rape was ordered by the tribal elders and who challenged the authority of Sharia law and tradition by taking them to court. Hawkins began his speech by saying that he had never been in a room with so many people who adhered to my values. His organization had been oppressed by their oppressors as well, he intimated. We are censored in all the rogue gallery states, China, Iran, and, here he paused for effect, Israel. But I don't want to talk today about that, because censorship in the West is also a problem. Hawkins recalled how after the death of KGB founder Leventi Bera, the Kremlin ordered that all copies of the Soviet encyclopedia have the chapter on him ripped out and replaced with additional pages on the Bering Strait. The remnants of the torn-out pages bore witness to the change. Now, he said, with all information stored centrally on computers, a billionaire could order newspapers to delete pages, and no one would ever know that history had been changed. He who controls the internet servers controls the intellectual record of mankind, Hawkins declared, and by controlling that, controls our perceptions of who we are, and by controlling that, controls what laws and what regulations we make in society, end quote. To stand up against the forces of erasure, there is WikiLeaks, to which Hawkins often referred to as I. Hawkins then reminded those of you in the audience familiar with World War II of the statement that the Nazis put on the front concentration camps that work brings freedom. I guess you can't pronounce Arbeit macht frei, an idea that Himmler had when he himself was in prison. After a dramatic pause, he continued, but in my investigations, exposing documents which include many abuses by the United States military, many which include main manuals of prison camps like Abu Ghraib, Baghdad, and Guantanamo, I have seen pictures on the front of their camps of their slogans. So guess which camp has honor bound to defend freedom on the front of it? Hawkins paused again. The defense of freedom as a value is on the front of Guantanamo Bay, and I say that as a perversion of the truth, that the slogan is worse than work brings freedom, end quote. Again, another individual who can't pronounce the words Arbeit macht frei. Only days after this triumphant revelation of collateral murder, and the only 7 months before Hawkins would release 250,000 secret American diplomatic cables and thereby force American foreign policy into uncharted waters, Hawkins calmly equated Guantanamo, a prison facility with 600 inmates, to Auschwitz, a Nazi death camp in which over 1 million people were murdered. Billion. Until that moment, there had been little reason to think of WikiLeaks as an organization with any particular political agenda beyond the global facilitation of whistleblowing and the promotion of transparency, activities that appealed to many people on both the left and right. As late as 2008, WikiLeaks was insisting on its website that it was a completely neutral conduit for information and that it would crowdsource its analysis in that way that Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia written entirely by unpaid volunteers, allows public contributions to its entries. Yep, right. There was little reason to suspect WikiLeaks of having a special animus against the United States. In the first 3 years of its existence, WikiLeaks received and published hitherto secret documents concerning a wide variety of entries around the world. These included confidential investigations by Kroll associates of official corruption in Kenya, UN documents concerning sexual abuses by the organization's peacekeepers in the Congo, the tax returns of movie star turned tax refusenik Wesley Snipes, and private emails stolen from Sarah Palin and Holocaust denier David Irving. Bigger fish included the communications of a Swiss bank allegedly engaged in money laundering and tax evasion, and secret materials from the Church of Scientology. One of the most important WikiLeaks posting was the release of the ClimateGate emails that revealed how British academics at the heart of the global warming consensus had conspired to withhold awkward statistics. During those 3 years, WikiLeaks also published a manual of standard operating procedure of the Guantanamo Bay detention facility. This release, which was surely intended to be embarrassing, had nonetheless arguably been to the benefit of the United States military. What it revealed to anyone with any real understanding of either prisons, interrogation techniques, or the violent behavior of many Gitmo detainees was just how decent and humane the rules governing the facility really were and are. But that was before collateral murder. In 2010, the focus of WikiLeaks turned directly and exclusively to the U.S. government and its conduct since September 11th. In the summer, it released the so-called war logs, nearly 500,000 internal Defense Department documents concerning the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was followed in November by the publication of the State Department cables. Indeed, so focused was WikiLeaks on the caches that it became all but impossible to access earlier postings on other subjects or submit new ones. This may well be because megaleaks, as Hawkins calls them, naturally take precedence over smaller ones. On the other hand, it is possible that America was Hawkins' target all along, and that his organization's earlier, more wide-ranging activities were designed to build its credibility and create a false impression of neutrality and objectivity before it went to war with the United States government. Such a notion probably gives Hawkins more credit than he deserves, given that without the alleged assistance of a disgruntled army private in Iraq with shocking access to these documents and the opportunity to copy and share them, WikiLeaks would have remained relatively obscure, posting an army manual one week and a corporate emails the next. However, the closer one examines Hawkins' various pronouncements, the more he looks like someone who might engage in dissimulation in order to mask a secret agenda. Though this idea sounds as stupid as that of conspiracy thriller, the circumstantial evidence for it includes the disillusionment and departure of key WikiLeaks team members in September of 2010. WikiLeaks functions as the internet equivalent of an old-fashioned spy's dead drop. It is a virtual location where would-be whistleblowers, or people claiming to be whistleblowers, from around the world can discreetly send documents knowing that they will then be made accessible to the public. WikiLeaks not only publishes these documents online after establishing their authenticity, it also decrypts them if they are encoded. Although WikiLeaks itself is too secretive to reveal the numbers or names of its staff, Hawkins has claimed that he has about 40 core volunteers and another 800 or so associates around the world who maintain the network of computer banks it needs to have permanent presence on the Internet. It's not clear where all of its funding comes from, though donors give it money via a variety of charitable foundations, and according to WikiLeaks, donors have included media organizations like the Los Angeles Times and the Hearst corporations, as well as individuals. Reportedly, the disillusioned WikiLeaks volunteers were disturbed by Hawkins' ruthless insistence on publishing the Afghan war logs without redacting names and other personal details to protect the lives of those mentioned in them, even after 5 major human rights organizations pleaded with him to do so in a joint email. His response to this was to demand that the 5 organizations assist in the task of redaction. He also said that WikiLeaks would need $700,000 to go through remaining unpublished documents. By that point, 77,000 of the 92,000 documents had already been released, and despite Hawkins' initial claim that names of Afghan informants had been redacted, newspapers like the New York Slimes found that this was often not the case. However, when Amnesty International suggested a conference call to discuss collaboration, Hawkins reportedly rebuffed the offer, saying on Twitter, "I'm very busy and have no time to deal with people who prefer to do nothing but cover their asses." Hawkins would not consider delaying publication, almost as if someone else had assigned a schedule for their release. The same was true of the subsequent, much bigger release of the Iraq War documents in the autumn. It was this decision, along with Hawkins' decision to provide early and embargoed access to the documents to certain media outlets, in contravention of the organization's let everyone see everything libertarian doctrine, that prompted a major internal revolt at WikiLeaks. According to reports in Wired, the publication with the best, most detailed coverage of WikiLeaks, the organization's German spokesman Daniel Berg confronted Hawkins about his autocratic and secretive behavior, and Hawkins responded by accusing Dominic Berg of leaking information about discontent within WikiLeaks to a columnist for Newsweek. Apparently Hawkins is not so keen about transparency when it comes to his own organization. There it seems that secrecy is necessary for the greater good. That the irony of this escapes him was apparent in an email exchange with Berg published on Wired.com. Convinced that Berg is the source of the leaked Newsweek, Hawkins says, "I'm investigating a serious security breach. Are you refusing to answer?" Berg replies that everyone in the organization is concerned about the news that Hawkins might be charged with rape in Sweden. Hawkins insists that claiming that all the rape allegations are part of a dirty tricks campaign against him, and also about another unspecified incident in 2007, presumably of a sexual nature as well. He also presses Hawkins about the Iraq documents, at one point exclaiming, "You are not anyone's king or god." Hawkins replies, "You are suspended for 1 month, effective immediately. If you wish to appeal, you will be heard on Tuesday." Berg resigned, and more departures followed, among them the organization's top programmer, who was running the effort to redact names. When an Icelandic volunteer challenged Hawkins about his treatment of Berg, the champion of democracy and transparency and enemy of corporate tyranny and arrogance responded, quote, "I am the heart and soul of this organization, its founder, philosopher, spokesperson, original coder, organizer, financier, and all the rest. If you have a problem with me, piss off." End quote. Hawkins has a history of alienating actual and potential friends and allies. Without asking for permission, he posted the complete text of Michelle Wrong's prize-winning book, It's Our Turn to Eat, on Wikileaks. The book is about the corruption of Kenyan officialdom, and Hawkins was apparently based in Kenya at the time. When Wrong saw that pirated versions of her copyrighted material were everywhere, she asked Wikileaks to take it down, pointing out, quote, "My entire African market is vanishing, and if people like me can't make any money from royalties, then publishers are not going to commission people writing about corruption in Africa." Hawkins refused and was, in Wrong's words, enormously pompous and infuriatingly self-righteous. Then there was his Hawkins' encounters with the leftist magazine Mother Jones. In the course of an otherwise positive profile in April 2010, the magazine pointed out that, contrary to WikiLeaks' claims on its website, neither Noam Chomsky nor a representative of the Dalai Lama was in fact on its advisory board. Indeed, when the magazine contacted Chomsky, he said it was the first he had heard of it. In response, Hawkins slammed Mother Jones for right-wing reality distortion. That's right, Mother Jones was peddling right-wing reality distortion. Mother Jones was doing this. The idea that Hawkins is engaged in a campaign against the United States is supported by a 2008 leak that had little or no justification on the grounds of transparency in the public interest of a classified 2004 report that included details of the workings of the U.S. Army's Warlock system for jamming the homemade bombs called IEDs set off by cell phones or radio transmitter. The report concerned the problematic way the jammers interfered with regular military communications, but its publication ensured that anyone, anywhere in the world who wanted to figure out how to defeat the Warlock now had the means to do so. WikiLeaks defenders asserted that by the time the report was released, technology had moved on, and U.S. forces in the field were largely using newer jamming devices. Still, even the anti-censorship campaigner Stephen Aftergood, who has become a stern critic of WikiLeaks for engaging in what he calls information vandalism, lambasted Hawkins for publishing a secret that could get people killed. In response, Hawkins told the journalist at Wired.com that he had been justified in doing so because, quote, "U.S. soldiers are not happy. That literally billions have gone on these jammers with apparently little thought going into how soldiers are going to communicate after they have been turned on," end quote. Despite his briefly adopting the mantle of a defender of U.S. troops, Hawkins also said that he had been proud to have published nearly the entire order of battle for American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2007, and had been furious with the mainstream media for not picking it up, as if the press should also be anxious to give useful information to America's enemies. And he was delighted when the U.S. Army issued a classified report put up on WikiLeaks in April 2010, saying that WikiLeaks itself might be a threat to force protection, operational security, information security, and counterintelligence. Perhaps for Hawkins, there are no real or relevant terrorist threats, or at least they pale before the threat of peace and freedom presented by the dastardly U.S. military. It is a cartoon version of the world in which America's forces are like the Imperial stormtroopers in Star Wars. That said, one of the odd things about Hawkins is that he seems to have no pop culture interest of the kind common to computer geniuses. Despite his lack of formal education, the subject of a custody dispute, he spent much of his youth on the run inside Australia with his mother. Hawkins was a juvenile prodigy, as a computer hacker under the same name Mendax, from Horse's Face, blended Mendax meaning nobly untruthful, has stated. He stated that he started one of Australia's first internet service providers before he was even out of his teens. Later, he studied physics and mathematics at Melbourne and other universities. He came to hold an Olympian view of himself and a rather Olympian perspective on other human beings. In a blog, he maintained the arrogance is always so common with these people, isn't it? In a blog he maintained online in 2006, Hawkins revealed himself to be so convinced of his own superiority that he sounded like a character in an Edwardian novel. At one point, he called his fellow attendees at a physics conference, quote, sniveling, fearful conformists of woefully inferior character, end quote. Hawkins is so much an autodidact and self-creation that one hesitates to place him in any particular political school. However, his convictions that the United States, especially its military, is a priori evil is very much in accord with a current on the Australian left associated with John Pilger, a celebrated journalist and filmmaker, and Larry Wilford Burchett, a star journalist and likely KGB agent, who championed the cause of North Korea. For Pilger, who writes a column for The New Statesman and produces documentaries that make Michael Moore look like Glenn Beck, all American interventions are imperialistic and carried out by the behest of a sinister corporations and plutocrats. And even communist crimes like those of the Khmer Rouge are really the fault of the United States. This brand of virulent anti-Americanism, common in Australian academic circles, seems to have curdled during the Vietnam War in which Australian troops fought, but when probing Hawkins' writings for his politics, it is also worth noting that the Australian leftivism has long had a strong anarchist current, awash in nostalgia sympathy for the rebels and bandits who had been transported to the continent when it was a prison colony of the British Empire. Hawkins seems to suffer from a more extreme version of a phenomenon common in anti-war circles in Britain and America. The absolute unquestioned certainty that American forces have been and are continuing to be guilty of terrible crimes because of their very nature. It is a form of knowledge that requires no evidence, or certainly no confirmation by a court of law. And in Hawkins's case, it apparently means that the Americans are now, and always have been, the bad guys. Certainly when Hawkins told Der Spiegel in the course of an interview about the war logs that, I enjoy crushing bastards, the bastards to whom he referred to were not the Taliban, which kills women for learning to read, or the Sunni insurgents who blow up packed Iraqi marketplaces and mosques, or the Shia militants who do Iran's murderous dirty work in Iraq and Lebanon. No, of course not. Hawkins was also revealing more than mere cold-bloodedness in his response to criticism for revealing in the war blogs the names of Afghans cited as informants or employees of U.S. troops. First, he said that if something happened to them as a result, it was certainly unfortunate, but it was collateral damage from his campaign for truth. But he also told the Times of London that Afghan informers for the coalition had behaved in a criminal way. They were, in other words, on the wrong side, mere collaborators who had put themselves in danger of reprisal. These are informants for their own country to the U.S. government. It was seen that in Hawkins's worldview, the Taliban is the legitimate government of Afghanistan resisting imperialist invaders. Until his arrest in December in London on the rape charges that had so concerned his Wikileaks colleagues, Hawkins himself was living a cloak-and-dagger semi-fugitive existence, sleeping on floors and communicating only through disposable mobile phones or online. It may therefore be no surprise that Wikileaks itself functions like a private version of the intelligence organization he hates and fears. And while he may see himself as a kind of cyber Robin Hood, and enjoyed being called a James Bond of journalism in Sweden, he more closely resembles one of those James Bond villains who runs a secret international criminal organization and has the desire, if not the power, to destroy a sovereign state he considers his enemy. It is telling that for all the talk of Hawkins's courage in taking on the American Goliath, the truth is that his assault on the U.S. government has not put him at great risk. Hawkins has long liked to talk in what seems like a self-dramatizing way about his persecution by authorities, complaining of covert following and hidden photography by police and intelligence agencies. The truth is that both the Bush and Obama administrations have proved remarkably feckless and feeble in their response to the war logs leaks, and worse, in the latter's failure to prevent the publication of the State Department cables it knew was coming. Indeed, the very fact that despite the revelations before April 2010 video, Hawkins remained alive and at liberty to continue to do even greater damage gives the lie to his paranoid fears of ruthless, hyper-powerful Western states capable of wiping out all truth and justice unless their actions are exposed by people like him. It would be interesting to see if Hawkins ever dares to take on the Russian FSB, the Chinese government, or even the French security services, all of which would have far fewer scruples about lethally punishing him than the American state he believes is so dangerous. The salty droid notes that Julian Hawkins has Rasputin eyes, and that's not a fucking compliment. Georgy Rasputin is famous for nothing. He was a mystic, or a healer, or a prophet, or a monk, blah, 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 bullshit. He was a creepy fucking poser that made everything and everyone around him worse. The plague of the psychopathic narcissist has been percolating for centuries. It's always been in the eyes. Miss Hawkins is the founder of Wikileaks, which, like Rasputin, isn't quite exactly anything, but the magical power of self-proclamation that proved so effective against the Romanovs still works on the web, and Wikileaks has mystically become synonymous with free speech. They are opening governments. See, they made that picture to prove it. Science. According to Princess Ass Ange, quote, I am the heart and soul of this organization, its founder, philosopher, spokesperson, original coder, organizer, financer, and all the rest, end quote. And if you don't like it, you can get the fuck out. If you're a nerd, and you probably are, then you're genetically predisposed toward liking WikiLeaks. Your nerdy little mind is telling you that WikiLeaks is just like Wikipedia, but for leaked documents. Concerned parties can contribute controversial documents anonymously and have them published on the web for all to see. The site agrees to protect the publication, come hell or oily water, in a way that lone individualists never could. Maybe throw in a dash of crowdsourcing for labor-intensive tasks like tagging and categorization, and openness may be marginally increased. Openness is good, truthful information is good, but your nerdy little mind is wrong. WikiLeaks is nothing like that. According to their About page, quote, when information comes in, our journalists analyze the material, verify it, and write a news piece about it describing its significance to society. We then publish both the news story and the original material in order to enable readers to analyze the story in the context of the original source material themselves. Our news stories are in the comfortable presentation style of Wikipedia, although the two organizations are not otherwise related. Unlike Wikipedia, random readers cannot edit our source documents. Random readers? Not allowed. Collaboration? Not allowed. Editorial judgment exercised about what to print, when to print it, and how it is significant. That's not new, or cool, or internet hip. It's just the same old shit, except worse. WikiLeaks is not a neutral conduit finally facilitating the freedom of raw data, which would be very interesting. It is just one of the tens of thousands of outlets editorializing the world through its own skewered perspective. Not particularly interesting. Long term, it will be exactly as valuable as the organization and people doing the editorializing. Unfortunately, at the heart and soul of WikiLeaks, there is a stinking, rotting, pale white turd who doesn't deserve to be listened to or taken seriously. Julian's first big story tells the whole tale of the non-value of his editorial voice. The story is based on 40 minutes of heavily leaked footage and edited, showing an Apache helicopter killing people in Baghdad. It's gruesome and horrible and hard to watch. Among the dead are numerous civilians and two Reuters reporters, Saeed Shumag and Amir Noor Eldin. Lots of civilians die in wars, millions in past wars, hundreds of thousands of the more current veterials. If this is news to you, then you are a moron. The United States of America firebombed Dresden and Tokyo into ashes, intentionally killing most of the civilian population. We carpet-bombed in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Korea. Oh, and there was that whole thing of us dropping the atomic bomb twice, says the author. The opinions of this piece is that of the author and not of the narrator. What constitutes murder in the context of a war where massive death is the desired outcome and the loss of innocent life inevitable? I don't fucking know. That's the answer. I don't know, and neither does Julian Hawkins. But that didn't stop him from calling this video and its associated website collateral murder. Murder? Fuck you, you pasty nobody. As the New Yorker points out, in the month before the video was shot, members of the battalion on the ground from the 16th Infantry Regiment had suffered more than 150 attacks and roadside bombings, 19 injuries and 4 deaths. Early that morning, the unit had been attacked by small arms fire. People are trying to kill them. Their friends are dying. Many have suffered intense brain traumas that they'll never recover from. They are overworked and underpaid. They are separated from their families for fucking years at a time. This war was not their idea. If any group of people deserve the benefit of the fucking doubt and the absolute guarantee of due process before judgment, it is the dudes we sent to die by rockets and bombs so that we can commute 60 miles each day to Stepford wives villas where our fat, spoiled children won't have to brush up against any black people. That doesn't mean that there aren't rules or that crimes can't be committed on the battlefield, but the calling out of an individual soldier must be done with extreme delicacy by those who have been afforded the luxury of not being fucking soldiers. Collateral murder is appropriately delicate in the same way that Madonna is appropriately chaste. But some good did come from this Tory and immature framing of one of society's most complex issues. Rasputin drew attention to himself and raised money for himself. He tweeted at WikiLeaks, raised $150K in donations since Monday. New funding model for journalism. Try doing it for a change. What the fuck? Seriously, what the fuck? Hey, douchebag. Real journalists fucking died in that video footage you just exploited for your own gain. They were walking around the streets of Baghdad in 2007 with their cameras along with sketchy characters who were carrying weapons, and they got gunned down by 30mm cannon fire. Holy shit. I'm no journalism expert, but that seems like pretty heroic levels of doing it to me. Have some fucking respect, you ridiculous bastard. One thing real journalists are not allowed to do is question WikiLeaks, or its useless twit-twat of a leader. After the New York Times ran an unflattering story about a self-absorbed asshole, Julian Hawkins is, paraphrasing here, Julian tweets from his WikiLeaks Twitter, New York Times ran a tabloid profile on WikiLeaks trying to balance itself. Case study in bad journalism. Wrong from top to bottom. That tabloid profile was written by John F. Burns, who has only won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for his brave journalism in shithole situations all across the globe, including Iraq and Afghanistan, where Mr. Burns has apparently been wasting his recent years not doing it. When U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates was critical of WikiLeaks' release of unredacted documents, possibly exposing intelligence sources to danger, WikiLeaks squeals from their Twitter page, says WikiLeaks, Gates, who killed thousands in Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran-Contra, says we might have blood on our hands. He killed thousands? He was an intelligence officer in the CIA, the director of the CIA, and then the president of Texas A&M University. When did he do all this killing? And a petulant tweet is how you respond to serious criticism from the more than gentlemanly Secretary of Defense? You think I'm irresponsible? Well, then you're a mass murderer! Fuck you! The Apache footage, the Iraq War documents, the Afghanistan documents, and the most recent State Department cables all seem to have come from one massive leak by U.S. Army intelligence analyst PFC Bradley Manning. Hawkins claims that he didn't assist or solicit the security breach, which would probably have been a crime, and I'm sure he did. He's just benevolently passing it on in a way that's sure to change the world in a magical fairy wonderland where the white witch of anarchy brings peace to all the peoples. Happily ever after, amen. And naturally, His Royal Highness doesn't have time to do any readings or writings about the documents. What with all his personal appearances, applause acceptances, constant begging them for monies, and Swedish boob rubbing. If you want to learn anything about what's in these precious documents, you'll have to read the tabloid reporters who don't believe in doing it, like the Queen does. So he doesn't get the information, and he doesn't write about it in any useful way. What the fuck does he do? Well, he begs for money and talks about himself in preposterous terms. From the WikiLeaks Twitter page, protect WikiLeaks from assassination or extradition. Vote for Julian as Time Person of the Year. The old Person of the Year protection racket that did so much for Lucky in 1977 winner Anwar Sadat, assassinated in 1981, or even luckier 1963 winner Martin Luther King Jr., assassinated in 1968. Vote Julian for Person of the Year. He emailed some documents that some other dude emailed him to the New York Times. Oh, and he also made a YouTube video. Winner! I hope Jules and the 1938 winner Hitler are very happy together. But Droid, he doesn't do nothing. He provides a secure anonymous channel for legals to submit information, says someone who still uses Windows XP. What the hell are you talking about, Windows XP user? You're dumb. Anonymous submission is an already solved problem. People submit all sorts of crazy stuff to the salty droid anonymously. The web is awesome like that, and while Julian might be good at talking up his mad encryption skills, it seems maybe he's not so good about the actual delivery. According to Wired.com, on June 12th, WikiLeaks' secure submission page stopped working after the site failed to renew its SSL certificate, a basic web protection that costs less than $30 a year and takes only hours to set up. A May profile in the New Yorker reported that WikiLeaks had been receiving about 30 document submissions a day when it was fully operational. With its Tor hidden service down, and now its SSL submission page missing, the average WikiLeaks leaker would seem to be blocked. I'll bet my nuts and bolts that the 30 leaks per day figure was a lie. The number of Bay people in the world who are willing to risk their asses and assets is infinitesimally small. It's a miracle that such people exist at all. And if you're going to put your ass on the line, why would you rely on this little dirtbag? His most prominent source is currently facing 52 years in prison, according to a report on that contained this kick-ass graphic. WikiLeaks pledged to help PFC Manning with his legal costs, but they still haven't. Fucking ghetto. Future leakers are advised to send their documents directly to actual journalists, cut out the white monkey brigade middleman. The same New Yorker article that Wired mentioned also had this interesting tidbit. Before launching the site, Hawkins needed to show potential contributors that it was viable. One of the WikiLeaks activists owned a server that was being used as a node for the Tor network. Millions of secret transmissions passed through it. The activist noted that hackers from China were using the network to gather foreign governments' information and began to record this traffic. Only a small fraction has ever been posted on WikiLeaks, but the initial tranche served as the site's foundation, and Hawkins was able to say, "We have received over 1 million documents from 13 countries." But they received it by hacking a hacker? The Tor network is how many people and operations, including WikiLeaks, attempt to maintain their privacy. If WikiLeaks pulled 1 million documents from a Tor stream, then they'll likely have all sorts of sensitive material that has nothing to do with government imperialism or mass murdering, just people's regular old private stuff. Privacy may be less important than speech, but it's still a fucking important thing. It's still a good and a virtue, and something that we've all agreed upon. But Julian doesn't believe in all these other people's right to privacy, and naturally Wired is crap. From their Twitter page says WikiLeaks, Wired has spoken to no staffers, no publication dates has slipped. Wired has an agenda, doesn't check facts, and is not to be trusted. And how's come the Knight Foundation won't give WikiLeaks one of their $500,000 grants to support digital age journalism? Could it possibly be because there were other worthy candidates? No. Nope. From the WikiLeaks Twitter page, WikiLeaks was the highest rated project in the Knight Town, strongly recommended to the board, but gets no funding. Go figure. Knight grants $2.7 million, 12 guarantees it will impact future of news, but not WikiLeaks? Knight's really looking for impact? Knight Foundation sucks crap. How dare they find impact elsewhere? Just another stooge for the mass murderers, I suppose. Oh, and by the way, WikiLeaks is down. He couldn't even do that one fucking thing. All this bullshit talk ahead of time about rotating mirrors inside unstoppable bunker flux capacitors, but come crunch time, he's down like a bitch in the first round. He was dropped from PayPal and from DNS server and then from Amazon, hosting after pressure by the U.S. government. So the plan was to piss all over the American government, insult the egos of one of the world's most other leaders, and then host all that shit on the servers of one of America's largest and awesomest companies. Worst plan ever. But Julian will have this tweet, vengeance, from the WikiLeaks Twitter page. If Amazon is so uncomfortable with the First Amendment, they should get out of the business of selling books. And WikiLeaks servers at Amazon ousted. Free speech in the land of the free. Fine, our dollars are now spent to employ people in Europe. Oh, snap! If Amazon was a 9-year-old girl, she'd be so crying right now. Speaking of 9-year-old girls, this whole Amazon situation makes the EFF, an advocate for free speech on the web, have a hissy fit. Suddenly, WikiLeaks has become the internet scapegoat, with a who's who of American and foreign companies choosing to shun the site. Let's be clear, in the United States at least, WikiLeaks has a fundamental right to publish truthful political information, and equally important, internet users have a fundamental right to read that information and voice their opinions about it. We live in a society that values freedom of expression and shuns censorship. Unfortunately, those values are only as strong as the will to support them, a will that seems to be dwindling now in an alarming way. You're alarmed that Amazon bowed to pressure from the United States government? Okay. Sourcing Joint Info was removed from Bluehost after pressure from Chris Zavadowski. Who? Yeah, exactly. Let's be clear. The corporate web is ready to banish anyone without notice or process at the very first whiff of trouble. It's none of their financial interest to host sites that have passionate haters, and there is no penalty for refusing to host someone's lawful content. It's a dreadfully important and serious issue because the internet could enable a revolution of free speech at the fringes. Speech from the previously unheard, from the disenfranchised, from the abused customer, the recovering cult victim, or the part-time activist. That's the shit that matters. Holding up and propping up uber-poser Julian Hawkins will only make things worse. The government has the right to take an idiotic public stand against WikiLeaks in the same way that WikiLeaks has the right to take an idiotic public stand against the government. Note for the record, the narrator would disagree with Amazon and other publishers refusing to publish WikiLeaks, as idiotic as they are. But the article goes on, there's no clause in the Constitution that says Senator Lieberman can't bitch and moan about stuff. If the government tries to bring criminal charges against Assange, against Mr. Hawkins for the simple publication of the information, then a stand for principle in spite of the specifics is probably warranted. Well, thank you, Mr. Droid. But if no such actions are taken, then let Julian Hawkins drown in the mud hole that he's dug for himself. I fanatically support free speech. I support transparency and openness. I support punk-fucking rock internet awesomeness. But Julian Hawkins and his Rasputin eyes can definitely bite me. Go fuck yourself. When Wikileaks founder Julian Hawkins went into hiding in Ecuador's London embassy in 2012 after publishing classified American intelligence stolen by U.S. Army private, later convicted of espionage, he did so as a hero to anti-secrecy activists. In exile, Hawkins reportedly reopposed his organization into clearinghouse for laundering laundered intelligence obtained via Russian intelligence services, and his reputation became much diminished among his former boosters. So when Ecuador's hospitality was finally exhausted on Thursday, and British police literally dragged Hawkins toward a long-delayed rendezvous with justice, the WikiLeaks founder couldn't count on much overt support, and yet the concern for Hawkins and his nihilistic mission wasn't that hard to find. You just had to look for it behind the veiled concern for the supposed threat his arrest posed to press freedom. Even before a statement from the British police revealed that Hawkins had been taken into custody on behalf of United States authorities, and the Department of Justice had released an indictment detailing the charges against Hawkins would face upon extradition, the WikiLeaks chief sympathizers complained of the chilling effect his detention would have on the conduct of journalism. Reporters Without Borders Secretary General Christopher Delors warned that Hawkins' arrest would be a punitive measure and would set a dangerous precedent for journalists. A widely recirculated column for the Columbia Journalism Review, Matthew Ingram, speculated that because the Obama Justice Department declined to indict Hawkins, a Trump DOJ indictment would likely infringe upon journalists' constitutional protections. Prosecuting a foreign publisher for violating U.S. secrecy laws would set an especially dangerous precedent for U.S. journalists, the ACLU statement. First Amendment protects the freedom to publish, the Daily Beast national editor Justin Miller opined. Otherwise, the government decides who is a journalist, which means who deserves protection and who doesn't. Down that road lies tyranny. End quote. But the Justice Department's indictment alleged that Hawkins hadn't simply published the information Private Bradley Manning illegally pilfered without properly redacting it to protect the lives of innocents or preserve U.S. national security interests. He had actively conspired with Manning to secure that information. Hawkins agreed to assist Bradley in cracking a password stored on the United States Defense Department computers connected to the secret Internet Protocol Network, a United States government network used for classified documents and communications, the DOJ indictment reads. Quite simply, conspiring to hack into American intelligence systems to expose state secrets is not what journalists do. Even after the Justice Department's indictment revealed that Hawkins and company were not being prosecuted for their reportorial curiosity, the usual suspects continued to render garments. This is a huge attack on press freedom, wrote Glenn Greenwald, directly citing the DOJ's indictment. The arrests of hashtag Julian Hawkins is meant to send a message to all Americans and journalists, wrote a 2020 presidential candidate and Bashar al-Assad confidant Representative Tulsi Gabbard. Quote, be quiet, behave, toe the line, or you will pay the price, end quote. Hardly. The Department of Justice guidelines governing what journalist practices can and cannot be prosecuted are relatively straightforward, and they contain some glaring exemptions. For example, individuals who are believed to be aiding, abetting, or conspiring illegal activity with a person or organization is likely to find themselves in the DOJ crosshairs. The DOJ's indictment doesn't focus on information WikiLeaks published, but rather how the documents were obtained. The indictment does have some troubling elements, notably the notion that Hawkins encouraged Bradley to hand over all the intelligence to which he was privy, a claim that could reasonably apply to any number of journalistic practices. But the DOJ's central allegation that Hawkins helped crack a Defense Department password so Bradley could secure as many classified documents as possible is beyond the remit of any journalist. That is the conduct of a hostile intelligence agency. Though it may not be prosecutable, it is dispiriting to see many journalistic watchdogs look beyond what Hawkins' organization published simply to defend its right to publish. The documents WikiLeaks revealed often contained information of almost no journalistic value, but which had substantial worth to America's adversaries. It's unclear what blows for freedom were struck when Hawkins published information in 2008 detailing how U.S. Army jammed the signals meant to detonate improvised explosive devices, potentially allowing America's adversaries to defeat that system. Nor is the journalistic merit associated with exposing the names of America's Afghan and Iraqi informants immediately apparent, though it's quite clear what kind of value that information represented to opponents of America's war effort. This was not transparency. It was sabotage. Journalists and their advocates would have been better served by keeping their powder dry before advocating on Hawkins' behalf, aligning themselves in the process with the conduct benefiting of a counterintelligence operative more so than a reporter. Those who scanned upon reading and recanted the Justice Department's indictments at least acted in good faith. Those who maintain even now that the charges against Hawkins represent an assault on the First Amendment have not.